Hello again, everybody. This is Steve coming to you with another guide to writing. This one covers food. Now, I mentioned food a little bit in one of my intro videos. Probably spent 15 minutes on it, kind of covering the basics of food in your writing. That was part of your world building, and it's an important part. So I figured I should probably make another video that's a bit more dedicated. And it also shows some of the ideas I've used for food. Food doesn't have to be an everything item in your story. You don't have to go into a lot of detail with it, but it does need to be there. It doesn't have to be there in every book, in every story, in every scene, but again, it does need to be there. Because food drives humanity. It's how we live, it's how we survive, it's how every living thing survives. There's some kind of food, regardless of what it is, that they have to eat to survive. Even in a sense, androids even have to eat, but they eat energy, if you want to look at it that way. But everything needs to eat to survive. So food, again, is going to be an important thing in your books. It might be related to, like, you might have a wedding and then there's a feast with it. You might have a mountain village that's struggling to get enough food to survive for winter, kind of like I showed in the other video where they had the cellar, the food cellar, root cellar, whatever you want to call it, and they were storing food. Depending on how advanced your society is, you might have simple things like root cellars and dried foods, fermented foods. They might have ice houses and stuff like that, or you might have 25th century high-tech space society where the food is replicated, or the food is something really advanced. It's very, very advanced but very nutritional. Walk up to a food replicator and tea, Earl Grey black, or something like that. So even in that kind of situation, you still have food, and food it's a comfort item, it's a subsistence item. It's an item for celebration, and this, and when I say food, I'm not just talking about steak and potatoes and stuff like that. I'm talking your beverages, your pastries. You could have, just there's a whole gambit of food that's involved. You might have survival food, which brings me to my first point here. This comes out of the Off-World Chronicles. This is one of my solutions to how the racers initially survive, because the basic backstory, it's not talked about in the book, but the basic backstory is, or I shouldn't say the book, the series, the basic backstory is the controllers, when they set up the race, they were going to just be as mean and cruel and vicious as they could be, because the Section 17 wouldn't have been quite that much. They were humans. Evil humans, but humans. The Brotherhood had absolutely no problem tormenting people because they were demons. And one of the first things that happened, for any of you that know the Bible, one of the first things that happened was God walked in and said, no. And of course, being demons, they have to listen. And he said, no, they have to be given a fair chance. Well, this is where the survival food came from, because this was essentially the solution. The Brotherhood wasn't going to come up with a solution. They weren't allowed to torment the people, but they weren't going to come up with a solution to help the people. Well, Section 17 came in and says, well, why don't we give this survival food? We use it, and we will, we give it to them. Each of the survival packs is essentially kind of like a little MRE, but it's like in cracker form. And, you open it up, it looks like a package of graham crackers. What's interesting about it is the way the technology is designed. It's a bland, basic cracker, but it has a lot of nutrition, has all of the vitamins and minerals you need, all the nutrients, the carbohydrates, everything. And it's in this neat, tidy little foil pack. Like I say, it's just like getting a pack of graham crackers. But the thing is, you're not stuck with that one flavor. The way it's designed is, if you're hungry for beef stroganoff, or you're hungry for a hamburger or something, you chomp into it, and it tastes just like what you're thinking about, or what you're hungry for. And it's not that's the actual flavor. The actual flavor is essentially this bland saltine cracker. But the way it's set up, that combined with your implants, if you're a racer, they taste like whatever you're hungry for, because it tricks your senses into thinking it's some other flavor. The texture probably doesn't match. I never really covered that because I didn't think it was necessary. But it'd be like you're eating a graham cracker and you're tasting hamburger. So that was one of the solutions I came up with for a food item, because the idea was that you were given just enough of these for one day. So what the incentive was, if something happened to you and you got stuck in one location and you couldn't move, say you broke your leg and you were going to be stuck there for 2 weeks before you could start moving again, you could, if you had a node nearby, one of the resource nodes, you could go over to the resource node, request a daily ration. It would give you the ration. It would give you just enough to survive. And then as the distance between the resource nodes increased, it would give you the incentive to move faster and move farther, but it also gave you time to adapt, to learn how to survive. Because if you weren't, if you didn't come in with that survival knowledge like Simon did, you had to learn it as you went, which was the nice thing about having the implants and the race guide and other things like that, because it gave you everything you needed to learn that stuff and become self-sufficient. So that was one of my solutions to a food problem. Yeah, that's irrelevant. And I've mentioned this in a couple of different videos. This right here is an important item. I'm not going to go into it in as much detail as I did with the other ones, but looking at it from the sense of harvest moss for Terrafall, you've got food insecurity because they have such a short growing season, which is, in certain situations you're going to have that. You might have somebody who lives in a village that's in an area that is just infamous for bad weather. And they're, and because of that, their crops are regularly getting flooded out. They're getting destroyed by hail, different things like that. And they are struggling to survive. And in the olden days, you might think, oh yeah, they lived these quaint little lives in cabins and kind of Amish style and stuff like that. No, every day was a struggle just to survive. It wasn't until we started getting into modernity that there started to be a stable food supply. In antiquity, unless you had like continuous bumper crops, you were always struggling to have just enough to get by for that year. It was a constant fight. That's just a given. That was just how it was in the old days, and that actually works into can work into your stories, because then it gives it can create suspense. It can create I'm trying to think of the word, a crisis, something for the characters to push against, something for the society to push against, something to create a struggle, to keep to make the story interesting. To create that nail biter experience. And, oh no, are they going to have enough to eat, or are they going to have to start killing their pets and animals and stuff to survive? Is everybody going to starve to death? Basically, how is this going to impact things? And it's like I mentioned before with the cycles of the Earth. When it gets warmer, you get longer growing seasons and less crop loss, and therefore you get you don't have to worry about food security. You've got food abundance. As a matter of fact, at some point you start getting so much food that some of your food starts going to waste because you just can't consume it fast enough. And and then you hit that peak of warm weather, and it goes down the other direction and gets into the cold period. I mean, if you look at the Middle Ages, that was a cold period. And you had outside pressures, you had internal pressures, you had the weather was working against them. These people were constantly starving. They were barely making it year to year. And that creates a good framework, a good struggle on which to build your story. It's still early in the morning for me, so I'm not thinking right now as far as what the actual word is, but it's if you think of it as crisis, that's a good way to look at it for what you're trying to do, the struggles and stuff. Another thing you have to look at is your animals, because animals, as much as some people want to run around and hug the fluffy bunnies and pet the cute little deer and stuff, when you're talking about survival, everything from a house cat and a rabbit up to a cow and a horse and everything in between is food. Because if you're starving, Fluffy's going to be on the dinner table if you're starving bad enough. Trust me. There's a lot of stories about that where people, they had no choice but to eat their pets because they didn't have any food. That was the only way they were going to survive. Now, I'm not saying, go do that because that, I would never want to eat my cat. I personally would starve before I would eat my cat, which my cat's over here going, oh, thank you. But no, I mean, when I grew up, we actually went out and we hunted rabbits, we hunted squirrel, we hunted deer, we harvested them, we brought them in, butchered them, put them in the freezer, and they're gamey. They have a very, very strong flavor. If you get the some of the squirrels that are near pine trees, they'll eat the cones, and oh my goodness, you bet they work better for thinning paint than they do for eating. But if you're hungry enough, you'll eat them. Trust me. Like I said, and I take that from personal experience. It's not a nice thing, but it is a thing. And it's a fact of life, and it's something they've done for centuries, millennia actually. You eat the good food when you have the good food, and if you don't have the good food, you eat whatever's left over. But with the animals, you're going to have some animals that are domestic animals. And when I say domestic, I'm talking, stuff that's been domesticated, like cows and chickens and horses and things like that. And yes, people ate horses. From what I've never done it, so don't freak out on me. But from what I hear, it's not the best meat, but it does work in a pinch. I mean, there were people in the Middle Ages that were starving, and they had a choice of starve to death or eat their horse, so they ate their horse. And again, that's things you can put into your stories. You can, and that can fall on the tragedy side. That can fall on the, the struggle, the desperation, where they're over there, and they're eyeing their horse kind of like, yeah, we're starving, and we've got a horse standing over here, and the horse is kind of like, why are you looking at me like that? So, and then you've also got to consider too with your animals, you've got vermin issues. Because these animals will get in, like if you're in the woods and you're surviving, these animals are trying to survive too. They're starving. They're struggling to find viable food. Now, in the summer, they'll have plenty of food. In the winter, not so much. And they're going to try to get into your food supplies, especially mice. But you're also, you'll have, of course, the cats will follow the mice, but you'll get rabbits in there. You'll get fox. You'll get coon. All kinds of stuff that'll try to raid your food supply. You get insects. So, it's everybody and his brother fighting nature trying just to survive. And that's things you got to consider when you put into your story. And I'm not trying to put a big doom and gloom on that. I'm just saying that's one side of it. You could have the other side where you've got bumper crops. You don't have vermin. You don't have pestilence. You don't have crickets and locusts and stuff coming by and eating your entire field and stuff. Things like that. And here's an interesting little factoid. Of all the insects that are out there, the one that is human safe and works in a pinch is the locust. The locust is actually an edible bug. Now, you have people that eat ants and stuff like that, but you got to watch out for parasites with those. So that they would work in a pinch, but they're also going to create a possible health issue later on down the road. So you got to consider that while you're eating that, which is something else with food, is you've got pestilences in the food that can impact people. There are funguses that get into certain foods that if, you can, like say, I can't remember the name of it, but they had a problem with it in Egypt, ancient Egypt. But basically it's a mold that gets into the wheat. And you can, take and sift the wheat, winnow it and grind it down and put it into a loaf of bread and bake it and kill the fungus. The problem is the poison of the fungus is still in that bread, and when you eat that bread, it kills you. You die of poison. It's like E. coli. It's a very deadly, dangerous neurotoxin, and a lot of people died because of moldy wheat, whether they realized it or not. So, your food supply can kill you. So that's something else to consider and think about. And I know, like I say, I'm on a doom and gloom thing, but I'm looking at it as most people are going to look at the happy, the happy bunnies and flowers and sunshine type side of food. I'm showing you that there's the other side of food, which will actually add suspense and drama and other things like that to your story. It will add good, useful content that can create the struggle necessary to drive your story. Now, like with this one here, one of the other things you can do is if you have trouble with coming up with new foods, one thing you can do is you can take existing foods and rethink them. Like with, I come back to Offworld just for the simple fact that there's a lot of useful stuff I have in Offworld. Some of the other books I don't have that because it wasn't necessary. Like in Land of the Lions, the most you have is Qatar. Basically, it was their version of coffee, which I'll get to that in a second. But that one only had Qatar. Earthfleet had coffee and sandwiches and a few. Like you saw meals, but you didn't see much beyond that. In Offworld, I got right into the nuts and bolts of food because it was a lot more important in there than it was in the other two worlds. But anyways, as I was saying, if you want to, you can take existing animals and give them a different name. You can give, kind of like the Trovet. The Trovet's basically a rabbit, but I decided to give it a different name because it was on a different planet. Same thing with the foods. Like on Offworld, you have Shiatine, which is essentially a different version of oats. It would be like saying we went out in our field and we grew Bantam this year. Bantam is just a breed of corn. You're saying you grew corn, but you're saying I grew Bantam, which is a breed of corn. So kind of a subset of corn. Shiotine would essentially be the same thing. But they, out on this planet, they don't call it oats. They call it more, they developed their own breed called Shiotine, and that's what they call their oats. Gaston's was basically somebody's pun that kind of stuck. They're a legume. They're a green bean. Naslet. Now, Naslet's an interesting one. This is one I decided to get a little creative with. What this is essentially what you would get if a strawberry and a ear of wheat had a kid. Seriously. It's kind of neat because it says wheat-like grain, but it has a strawberry flavor to it. And it's... what you do is you grow it. It's the last crop you plant and the first one you harvest. You plant it after everything else because when you plant your fields, your wheat goes in first, then your corn and beans, and then your naslet. And then, because the naslet needs warm weather to grow. It does not like cold. It's very sensitive to cold, which is a disadvantage, but when you consider what it produces this really sweet flavored grain flour. Because that's what they do. They take it and they will harvest it just like wheat, thresh it, winnow it, all that kind of stuff, run it through a flour mill to create the flour, and then you put that into a cake, and it's like you could take water, oil, and the naslet flour, grind it, or mix it together, create some bread, bake it, and when you eat it, it's this bread. It's a sweet bread that has this kind of strawberry flavor to it. And they use it in pies and cakes and all kinds of places because it adds a neat little flavor to the meal. They do have strawberries. I never dug into that part of it, but they do have strawberries on that, and they have other berry plants that are similar to blueberries and other stuff we know. They have those. I never dug into that, but they do have those. I only dug into the ones that I felt were necessary for the story. But as far as the background was concerned, they had a lot of other crops that were never actually touched. They were there if I wanted to use them, but ended up not needing them. So, Spunions, that was a name I just came up with. It was a pun. Because everyone, what's another name for potatoes? A spud. So I called them Spunions. I think there's actually a food product with a similar name, but that's for onions. This was for potatoes. So, kind of a play on that. Debonate, kind of a fancy name for coffee. That's that's their version of coffee. I never really went into the specifics of it, but if I would have, I probably would have also covered, where does it come from, how is it grown, stuff like that, which is good to know. If you think you really need that, even as just background knowledge that's not used in the book, but something that you would use, because those little details are going to drive certain parts of your book. Now, with mine, it was just a case of here's a cup of coffee. That was all it needed to be. So I didn't go into the kind of the index side of it, I guess would be a way to say it, where, here's where it comes from, here's how it's made, all the background details. I realized early on I didn't need that. All I needed to know was it was a cup of coffee and it was called Debonate. That was all they needed to know. It's kind of like Qatar. You only needed to know that it was a strong cup of coffee. The rest of the details were not necessary, so I didn't do a lot of background on it. Depends on how much you actually need in your story, either directly or indirectly, to how much you develop the background on these various items. Quol tetra, which is a bit of a mouthful, a tongue twister, that's the local variety of rice. Quol tetra, I don't remember where I came up with the name, but it was kind of one of those, kind of had to sound fancy old world in a sense. So that's kind of where I came up with that. Keplet. Keplet is a type of corn. It's kind of like Bantam is a type of corn. So a Keplet is essentially a variety of corn that they have for the local planet, or for the planet of Offworld, and it's a standard yellow corn, yellow sweet corn. Now it can be ground up and create cornmeal and things like that, but it's a sweet type of corn. It's not your normal field corn. It's not your normal corn that you feed cattle and stuff. Now they do feed the cattle this, but it's basically when they get it, they're getting kind of this very flavorful, semi-sweet, delicious treat, and the animals just love it. They just absolutely adore it. Barleycorn, which is ironic because this is corn, this is not, but it's called barleycorn, which there's a long story behind that, but basically the name is a pun. I won't go into the details of that, but the name, I came up with the name as a pun. I'll let you figure out how the pun came together. But anyways, this right here is the local wheat variety. Because like with this is the oats, and then this down here was the wheat variety. And that wasn't, that's not all that you have on the planet. There's a lot of other stuff you have on the planet. And going back to the Qatar, another thing that you're going to want to deal with a bunch in your books, not a bunch. It depends on the story and the need for it. You might, in your story, you might say he drank a cup of ale. That's all the reader needs to know, which means you don't need a lot of backstory behind the ale. Like, what kind of ale is it? What's its flavor? Where does it come from? How is it produced? Etc. like that. You don't need that. It's just, he has a gigantic wooden mug of ale. It's just like with me, with Qatar. He has a strong cup of black coffee. That was all you really needed to know. And, and I didn't develop it any further. But there'll be other things like wines and fruit juices and, ironically enough, fermented things like apple cider vinegar and regular vinegar, which, if I remember correctly, regular vinegar is made from fermenting pressed onions. If I'm remembering correctly. I could be wrong. Correct me if I am. But, you've got all these different beverages, and then these liquid items. There are going to be things like, you're going to have in your world, like vanilla and creamer and milk and coconut milk. You might have oils. Oils is going to be an important one. If it's a more advanced society, they might have nut oils, they might have vegetable oils, they might have something entirely different. If you're in a more primitive society, you'll have lard, you'll have tallow, you'll have stuff that's easy to extract from the animals and plants in the area. If it's a primitive society, the easiest oil to get a hold of is the fat from animals. I know that's probably gross to some of you, but that is, when, again, going down to simple living, it's what do you do to survive? You literally do whatever you can. You also have that lack of technology and knowledge, so you're working with only the things you know and understand. So yeah, you got like if you have even like a fantasy society, medieval society, your primary oils are going to be lard, tallow, and what was the other one? Olive oil. You're going to be able to press olive oil. Back in antiquity, they would not have been able to press nut oils because they would not have had the knowledge or the technology to do that, because that requires special conditions to do that. In cases like that, like I say, olive oil, that's an easy one to get because you just press an olive and boom, there's your oil. There would have been other, what I would call vegetable oils that they could have produced. Depends on what they had in the local area as to what they could actually produce. Middle technology societies would have been able to get nut oil. Higher end societies wouldn't have been able to get vegetable oils. There is other oils and liquids like that as your technology goes higher, you get better quality food products. Take like flour, for example. Back in antiquity, you had two stones you stuck together, you put the wheat grains in the middle of it and turned it in a circle, and flour came out because it would stone grind it, which I still say stone ground flour is the best. But nowadays, they don't stone grind the flour. What they do is they run it through what they call a roller mill. Roller mills are interesting. Go look them up. Roller mills actually produce a better quality of flour. I don't think the flavor's the same. Excuse me. I don't think the flavor's the same, but it produces a finer grain of flour and a better quality of flour. So, which means you can do a lot of different pastries and stuff that you can't do with stone ground flour. Stone ground flour tends to be your coarser pastries, your breads, your not your lighter cakes. It's going to tend to be your heavier cakes, stuff like that, your cookies, things that don't require the more refined flour. Roller mills give you the more refined flour, so you can do the cakes and the finer pastries and the fluffier souffle. Well, not souffles, but what are those called? Well, they're a type of cake, and they're really, really light and fluffy. And I can't think of what they're called. But anyways, it'll allow you to do that because it's a finer grain of flour. Therefore, you can get a lighter cake and a lighter resulting pastry. But anyways, that's kind of the overview of this. And and I apologize if I grossed some of you out. I apologize if I freaked out some of you. But like I say, most people think in the realm of happy, fluffy, bunny, flower, sunshine type food situations. Your stories, if they're really good, are not going to always have that. Now, they will have that. There'll be times when you're going to have those happy moments with the food. But at the same time, you're also, to have a really good story, you're going to have that food struggle, that struggle to survive year to year, to preserve enough food, to have enough to eat so you don't starve to death and things like that. Even in a sci-fi society, you can have famine because things failed, because you had food production failures. Now, you might be able to fall back on technology, like a good example is Star Trek Discovery. They have an example, I think, season 3, towards the beginning, after they jump forward in time, they talk about a humanitarian crisis where all the crops failed, so they send them a whole bunch of food replicators. Well, that's fine. That might be one solution, but you still, if you notice, you still have the struggle. The food replicators are kind of the stopgap, but you still have the food struggle situation. And what happens if all the replicators fail? Oh, everybody's back to starving again. So, like I say, you have to consider both the good side and the bad side in all of your stories. You have to consider, when you tell the story, you have to consider both sides. Because when you tell your story, you've got a happy ending, but you've got to struggle first to get there. And your story needs to be relatable to life in the best way possible and as close to real life as possible, because the closer you get it to reality, the closer you get it to real life, the less suspension of disbelief that you have to fight through. The more, like, so basically, the more believable you can make the story, the more enjoyable it'll be for the reader, and the more they'll get out of it, and the happier they'll be. Which means, you can't have everything be perfect. That ends up getting to be a boring story. Make your characters work for what they're going for, which and that includes food. Food is one of those things that they have to work for. How they have to work for it, and again, that working for it on the food side of things may not be something that's in every story. It may be a background item, like in Land of the Lions. It was a background item. But without it being there, it would have lessened the story. So having that there, creating comfort foods, creating a element of life, creating something that, you eat 1, 2, 3 square meals a day, depending where you're at. For you, food is life. For your characters, food should be life. It may not have to be a primary part of the story, but food is life. And you have animals that are part of your story. Even if they're not food, they're still part of the story. They're part of your world. And I think, like, in a future video, I might cover water, some of the importance of that and things like that. But water is going to be another important item, which, considered a food item, if you will. But anyways, I will leave it at that, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks.